I sat in my favorite armchair, watching the setting sun dye the living room walls a deep shade of amber. My hand habitually stroked the worn armrest. The leather had become smooth over 40 years of service, almost mirror-like where my fingers touched it. 75 years. 75 long years, and I'd spent most of them in this house. Tonight I felt a particular heaviness in my chest. Perhaps it was the arthritis making itself felt again, or more likely, thoughts of Kingsley lingered. My son, my flesh and blood, my major failure in life. Alice, if you were here, I whispered, looking at the picture on the mantelpiece, you'd know what to do. Alice always knew what to do. My wife was like the arrow of a compass, always pointing in the right direction, even when the storms of uncertainty raged around her. We met in college, in a geology class. She was studying botany, but decided to broaden her horizons. I was amazed by her ability to see beauty in what others thought were just rocks. It was a sign to me that we were made for each other. Can you not fall in love with a woman who can marvel at the structure of ordinary quartz for 10 minutes? I often joked at family gatherings. Alice laughed and squeezed my hand tightly. She'd been gone 15 years. Pancreatic cancer, relentless and swift. Before I even realized what was happening, she was gone. And since then, our son has been off the rails. Kingsley's always been a difficult child, demanding, stubborn. Alice said he inherited my temper, but without the restraining power of my conscience. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was my own fault, working too much, rarely being home while he was growing up. But Alice and I were doing everything we could to give him a good education, a sure start in life. I rose from my chair, feeling my joints protesting the movement. My gaze slid over the shelving units that took up an entire wall. My mineral collection was the only thing that had brought me real pleasure since Alice's death. Each specimen had its own story, each one found in a special place. Many I had collected myself during expeditions when I worked as a geologist. I carefully picked up a piece of lapis lazuli, a deep blue with golden flecks of pyrite. It was a specimen we had found with Alice on our trip to Chile. I remembered her delighted exclamation when the sunlight first fell on the freshly chipped stone, making it shine like a piece of starry sky. A phone call snapped me out of my memories. I took my time answering it at my age. You don't expect urgent calls anymore, except for bad news. On the fifth ring, I picked up the phone. Dad, it's me. Kingsley's voice sounded tense. Hello, son, I answered, sitting back in my chair. Is something wrong? What makes you think something's wrong? There was a defensive tone in his voice. I just wanted to see how you were doing. I grinned. Kingsley never called for nothing. In his 37 years of life, I'd learned that lesson well. I'm fine, as usual. Listen, Dad. He paused and I braced myself for what came next. Remember that business project I was talking about? The one with the online consulting? I remember, I answered. 3 months ago, he had already asked for money for that project. He got it and apparently successfully spent it without any visible results. So we're almost up and running, but we need a small investment. Just 15 grand. I'll pay it back in a month. 2 at the most. I closed my eyes. History repeated itself with sad regularity. Ever since Kingsley graduated from college, he'd launched one promising project after another. An online retro clothing store, an app for jogging enthusiasts, a chain of science fiction-themed coffee shops. All of them failed, leaving behind only debt and my frustration. Kingsley, we've talked about this. I will no longer finance your ventures. Son, but Dad, his voice got higher, like when he was a kid and he was denied another toy. This isn't just a scheme. I have a business plan, potential clients. I've got it all worked out. Just like last time, and the time before that. I tried to speak calmly, but irritation seeped through my voice. Son, you're 37 years old. It's time you learn to live within your means. You just don't believe in me. You never did, now he was yelling. You don't have enough money for your own son, but you spend thousands on your stones. I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to hang up. Alice had always said we were too much alike, both stubborn as sheep, both unable to back down. But I knew I had to stay firm. My handouts, as she called them, only spoiled Kingsley. I earned my money through honest labor, and I have the right to spend it as I see fit. If you need extra money, take a second job or a loan from the bank. At your age, you don't need so much money anymore. Kingsley changed his tactics. You live alone in a huge house that you can't even maintain. Your pension, my pension is my concern, I interrupted him. And I keep the house quite well. Dad, be reasonable. You could sell this old mansion, buy yourself something smaller, and help me get back on my feet. That's it. Talking about the house again, the Victorian mansion I lived in was inherited from my parents. 3 floors, 5 bedrooms, a study, a large garden. Maybe it was a bit much for a lonely old man, but it was my home. It was where I'd grown up, where Alice and I had raised Kingsley, where every floorboard, every crack in the ceiling had a story. We've talked about this. It's not for sale. But it doesn't make sense. My son wouldn't let it go. You're spending a lot of money on heating empty rooms, on a gardener, on repairing the roof. Why? Because it's my house, I answered firmly. And that was the end of the conversation. There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. You know what? Kingsley finally said with coldness in his voice. I wasn't just calling for money. I wanted to tell you the news. I met a girl. Her name is Delphine. We've been dating for 3 months. This news took me by surprise. Kingsley never talked about his personal life, never brought anyone to meet me. That's, good, I said cautiously. I'm happy for you. We want to come over next Saturday to get acquainted. Sure, I'll be glad to see you. Good. See you Saturday then. And he hung up without saying goodbye. I slowly returned the phone to the base and sank back into my chair. Something about the call had made me uneasy. Kingsley hadn't shown any interest in my life for years unless it was about money. And suddenly such concern calls, visits, meeting a girl. My gaze slid around the room, stopping at the pictures. Alice with little Kingsley in her arms. Our wedding, Kingsley's graduation, Alice and I in Yellowstone. Both of us young, tanned, happy. When did it all go wrong? When did my son turn into a man who sees me as nothing more than a walking ATM machine and a potential inheritance? I walked to the window and pulled back the heavy curtain. Dusk had already fallen, turning the trees in the garden into dark silhouettes. The windows of the house across the street were lit, and the Pearson family was gathering for dinner. I saw Mrs. Pearson bustling about in the kitchen, Mr. Pearson helping to set the table, and their granddaughter running around waving some kind of toy. Just a normal family. Just a normal, happy family. Something I'll never have again. I turned back to my collection and gently ran my fingers over the polished surface of the amethyst. Alice had given me this specimen for our 20th wedding anniversary. It's as enduring as our love, she had said then. What would she advise now? How would she feel about Kingsley's sudden interest? Would she believe in his sincerity or see another attempt at manipulation? I didn't know the answers to those questions. All I knew was that something was going on, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. Saturday came too fast. I spent the morning preparing for a visit from my son and his mysterious Delphine. I cleaned the house, even though it was already clean, a habit of military neatness instilled by my father over the years. He made the roast from Alice's recipe, the same roast Kingsley had loved so much as a child. Maybe it was a naive gesture, an attempt to bring out the good in him, to remind him of a time when he didn't look at me as an obstacle to his inheritance. At exactly 3 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and went to open it. Kingsley stood on the doorstep, in a new suit, with a fashionable haircut, smelling of expensive perfume. Next to him was a slender woman in her 30s with flawless makeup and bright red nails. Hi, Dad. Kingsley hugged me awkwardly, patting me on the back. Meet Delphine, Delphine Carew. Nice to meet you, Mr. Briggs, she said in a velvet voice with a slight accent, extending her hand to me. Kingsley has told me so much about you. I shook her hand, cold and dry, with a manicure that must have cost as much as my weekly pension. I hope it's not all bad, I joked, stepping back to let them inside. Oh, not at all, she smiled, showing off her perfect white teeth. Only the best. I didn't believe her for a second. Something in her gaze reminded me of a predator assessing potential prey. Delphine surveyed the hallway with ill-concealed interest, her eyes lingering on the antique mirror, the antique clock, the heavy frame paintings. "What an amazing house," she said. "How old is it?" "It was built in 1889, I answered as I led them into the living room. "My family has owned it since 1938. "Amazing," Delphine repeated, running her finger along the wood paneling. "Such a history." Her tone suggested that history was a synonym for junk, but I held back. "Come in, make yourself comfortable. I've made dinner." "Daddy was always a good cook," Kingsley said suddenly, turning to Delphine. "His roast was my favorite meal when I was a kid." I looked at my son in surprise. He hadn't thought of such things in years. "What's going on?" We sat at the table in the dining room, another room filled with family heirlooms. The dark oak dining set, the silver candelabra, the collection of china behind the glass sideboard. Delphine surveyed it all with an expression I couldn't quite define, a mixture of admiration and calculation. "Do you live here alone, Mr. Briggs?" she asked, taking a plate of roast. "Yes, since my wife passed away." "Oh, I'm sorry for your loss." She touched my arm in a gesture that was meant to look sympathetic but seemed fake. "That was 15 years ago," I replied. "And all that time you've been managing such a big house by yourself?" There was a fake surprise in her voice. "It must be so hard." "I manage," I answered briefly. "I have an au pair who cleans once a week and a gardener for the backyard." "But still," she exchanged a quick glance with Kingsley. "A house this big for one person. It must be very expensive to maintain." There it is. I knew the conversation would turn in that direction sooner or later. "I can afford it," I said, cutting off a piece of meat. "As a geologist of 40 years' experience, I have a good pension, plus the investments Alice and I had made over the years." "Dad was always very prudent," Kingsley put in, "and frugal. I remember never getting fancy toys when I was a kid." There was an old resentment in his voice. "Yes, Alice and I didn't spoil him with expensive gifts, preferring to save for his education. But we never denied him what he needed. Instead, I paid for your education at one of the best private colleges in the country," I reminded him. "Yes, of course," Kingsley agreed quickly. "I'm very grateful for that." Another false note. Kingsley had never expressed gratitude for college. On the contrary, he always said that we forced him to go there, even though he wanted to travel around Europe for a year. "Kingsley told me that you collect minerals." Delphine skillfully translated the conversation. "It's so unusual." I nodded. "A professional habit. When you spend a lifetime studying rocks, you begin to see not only their scientific value, but also their aesthetic value. May I see your collection?" I hesitated. My collection was something personal, almost intimate, but to refuse would have been impolite. "After dinner, of course. And these silver candelabras. Are they real?" Delphine pointed to a table set. "Yes, a family heirloom. 19th century, made in Boston." "Amazing," she said. "I love antiques. They have so much soul. You know, I work in a modern art gallery, but I've always appreciated antiques." "You have?" I took a sip of wine. "And what gallery, if it's no secret?" Delphine hesitated for a moment. "Oh, it's a small private gallery downtown. Eclectic. Perhaps you haven't heard of it." I really hadn't heard of it, but I made a mental note to check it out later. "How's business?" "There's not as much interest in art these days as I'd like to see." "Business is evolving," she replied evasively. "You know how it is. Ups and downs." "Delphine is a real art expert," Kingsley interjected. "She helps wealthy clients build collections." "An art consultant," she explained. "It's a fascinating job. I get to meet interesting people, visit their homes. Some have such amazing collections, almost like museums. But no one has a house as stunning as yours, Mr. Briggs," she added, circling the room with her hand. "The wood paneling, the moldings on the ceiling. They don't do that now." "Thank you," I replied dryly. "Though the house does require constant maintenance. Old buildings are finicky." "Oh, I'm sure," Delphine said enthusiastically. "All those leaks, creaky floorboards, outdated wiring. It must be hard for you." "I'm coping," I repeated, starting to get annoyed. "You know," she leaned forward, as if about to share a secret. "If this house were mine, I'd keep all its historical value, but I'd modernize it a bit. For example, this dining room could be turned into an amazing art studio. There's so much light from the windows. I looked at Kingsley, expecting him to lambast his friend, but he was smiling, clearly approving of her fantasies about remodeling my house. And upstairs, how many bedrooms do you have? Delphine continued. 5, I answered, but I only use one. The others are guest bedrooms. 5 bedrooms, she splashed her hands. And you say you do all the cleaning yourself? Like I said, I have an assistant. Still, it's so much work. She shook her head with feigned concern. At your age, at my age, people know exactly what they're capable of. I cut her off. There was an awkward pause at the table. Kingsley coughed. Dad, Delphine and I are just worried about you. This house is really too big for one person. And what are you suggesting? I looked directly at my son. Well, Delphine and I were thinking, he took her hand, maybe you should think about something smaller, like a cozy apartment in an assisted living facility for the elderly. I felt a wave of anger rising inside. A nursing home? Are you suggesting I move into a nursing home? Not a nursing home, Kingsley quickly objected. Safforn. They're modern facilities with medical care, entertainment, people your age. People my age, I repeated. You mean old and infirm? Ezra, Delphine suddenly switched to you. Kingsley and I just want the best for you. Maintaining such a large house is not only physically demanding, but financially as well. Think of all the money you could save. I slowly set aside my fork and knife. What happens to the house if I move? I asked, even though I knew the answer perfectly well. Well, Kingsley and Delphine exchanged glances again. Delphine and I are just thinking about the future. We want to start a family. This house would be the perfect place for your grandchildren, wouldn't it? The cards had fallen into place. It's all very clear. I'll show you the mineral collection, I said, rising from the table, and then we need to talk. I led them into the office where my collection was stored in special cabinets with glass doors. Hundreds of specimens from all over the world, from ordinary granite to rare gemstones. Delphine oohed and awed as she looked at the exhibits, but I could see that she was not interested in the geological value of the stones, but in their potential value. She tried several times to specify the price of this or that specimen, but I avoided direct answers. Is this a real diamond? She asked, pointing to a rough crystal in one of the showcases. Yes, a rough diamond from South Africa, a gift from a colleague with whom we worked on an international project. How much is it worth? Her eyes lit up. For me, it is a memory of many years of friendship and cooperation, I answered evasively. After viewing the collection, we returned to the living room. I felt tired, not so much physically, but emotionally. The manipulations of my son and his girlfriend were too obvious and irritated me with their blatancy. So, I said as we settled into our chairs, let's be honest. You want me to sell the house and give you the money, and you want me to live out my days in a senior center. Dad, you've got it all wrong, Kingsley started, but Delphine put her hand on his knee, stopping him. Ezra, she said, Kingsley and I are really worried about you. At your age, living alone in such a huge house is just dangerous. What if you fall? What if you get sick at night? I have an emergency button and a security system, I replied. I'm not a helpless old man. But why do you need all this? She waved her hands. Why bother when you could live in comfort, without worries, among people who will take care of you? Will you take care of my house? I asked bluntly. Well, since you ask, Kingsley intervened. Yes, we'd like to live here. But that makes sense. I grew up in this house. It's part of my heritage. Besides, Delphine and I are planning to have children. They'll be happy in a big house with a garden. And when is the wedding? I asked. They looked at each other again. We haven't set a date yet, Kingsley answered. But it's not far off. I see, I nodded. What about finances? How do you plan to maintain this house considering that you, Kingsley, are still asking me for money for your business projects? My online consulting business is about to take off, my son hastened to assure me. I'm about to sign a contract with a major client. And your gallery, Delphine, does it bring in a steady income? Art is not always about money, she replied evasively, but I have connections in the collector's world. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the determination growing in me. I'm not selling the house, I said firmly. And I'm not moving into a nursing home or whatever you call it. This is my home, and I will stay here for the rest of my life. But Dad, Kingsley exclaimed, you can't be so selfish. Think of the future. My future. Have you ever thought about mine? I parried. For the last 15 years since your mother died, you've only visited me when you needed money. You didn't call on my birthday. You didn't come for Christmas. And now you show up with this woman and demand that I give you everything I have? Ezra, Delphine tried to take my hand, but I pulled away. No, I rose from the chair. I think it's time for you to leave. I have a headache. Dad, please. Kingsley stood up too. Let's talk calmly. We can find a solution that will satisfy everyone. There is a solution, I replied. I'm staying in my house. You look for another place to live. End of story. I walked them to the door, ignoring Kingsley's protests and Delphine's theatrical sighs. When the door closed behind them, I leaned against the wall, feeling my knees shake. Back in the living room, I poured myself a whiskey and sat down in a chair. I had a choice before me. Either resign myself to letting my son and his adventurous fiancée gradually take control of my life and property, or what? I picked up Alice's picture from the mantelpiece. What would you do if you were me, dear? I asked. There was no answer, of course, but I knew my wife. She always said you can't let people take advantage of your kindness, even if those people are your family, especially if they are family. I finished my whiskey and made my decision. Neither Kingsley nor his Delphine will get control of my life. I'm not going to let them manipulate me, push guilt or pity on me. It's time to take action. It's been 2 weeks since Kingsley and Delphine's visit. I hadn't heard a word from them, and that suited me just fine. Their plans for me were too obvious, and I preferred to stay away from them as I considered my next steps. That morning I did the usual things, watering the geraniums on the windowsill, sorting the mail, planning a trip to the supermarket. Life went on at its own measured pace. At 75, you appreciate this measured pace, this opportunity to do everything leisurely, enjoying every moment. The phone rang around 11. I took my time answering it while I made tea. On the 7th ring, I finally picked up the phone. Hello? Dad! Kingsley's voice sounded unusually excited. I have amazing news. I sighed, preparing myself for another story about a unique opportunity or a promising project that, of course, required my money. Hello, son. What's the news? Delphine and I are getting married, he blurted out. In a month. We've just decided everything. I froze with a cup of tea in my hand. It was unexpected. Despite their hints during their last visit, I didn't think they'd actually decide to get married so quickly. Congratulations, I said cautiously. It's a big step. The biggest step of my life, Dad. There was something like genuine joy in his voice, but I'd long ago forgotten how to trust my son's emotions. Too often they turned out to be a well-crafted game. And when exactly is the wedding? The 25th. A small ceremony. Just the closest people. You're invited, of course. Thank you. I'll try to be there, I said, even though I knew I wouldn't be here by then. But that's not all, Dad, Kingsley continued. Delphine and I have talked it over. After the wedding, we're moving in with you. I almost choked on my tea. I'm sorry, what? We're moving into your house, he repeated in a tone of voice that was unapologetic. Look, Dad, we've talked about this. It's hard for you to be alone in a big house like this. And Delphine and I want a family. It's the perfect solution. Perfect for who? I asked. Because it's definitely not for me. Come on, Dad. Kingsley was beginning to lose his patience. You can't be so selfish. The house is too big for you, and we all know it. And I have my family's future to think about. And where in your plans is there room for me? I clenched the phone receiver. Shiri, or are you suggesting I move out? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Kingsley coughed. Actually, yes. Delphine and I think you'd be much more comfortable in a specialized complex for the elderly. You'll be taken care of there. You'll have medical care, companionship. I've already said I'm not going to move to a nursing home, I said. It's not a nursing home, Kingsley said indignantly. It's a modern apartment complex with services. Delphine had already found a great option. Sun Terraces. There are small but very cozy apartments there, and they have everything you need. dining room, nurse's station, recreation room. So you've already found a place for me? Without even asking my opinion? We care about you. Kingsley's voice was accusatory, which is more than can be said for your attitude towards me. You've always been like that, only thinking about yourself. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. What are you talking about, Kingsley? My whole life, he was almost shouting now. You were always busy with your work, your precious stones. You never had time for my school competitions, for my interests. You always thought that money could replace attention and love. These accusations were unfair, and he knew it. Yes, I worked hard when he was a kid, but I never missed an important event in his life. I was always at school assemblies, his graduations, his competitions, and it wasn't about money. Alice and I just wanted to give him the best. That's not true, and you know it, I replied calmly. It is, Kingsley continued to rage. And now that I've finally found happiness with Delphine, you're getting in my way again. A selfish old man who clings to a house he doesn't need. Kingsley, I tried to keep my voice steady. I'm not going to argue with you. You're an adult, and if you're still blaming your parents for your failures, that's your problem, not mine. Shiktum, what do failures have to do with it? He was indignant. I'm doing great. I'm marrying a beautiful woman. I have a promising business. The same business for which you asked me for money a month ago? I asked. And 3 months ago? And 6 months ago? The business that is not making any profit? You just don't understand. Kingsley exploded again. Startups take time and investment, but you don't understand. You've worked in the same place your whole life, like a robot. I closed my eyes, feeling the fatigue come over me. This conversation was going nowhere. Kingsley hadn't heard me, like he hadn't heard me in years. Anyway, he continued more calmly, the decision has been made. Delphine and I are moving into the house after the wedding. I've already arranged with a realtor to find you an apartment in Sun Terraces. They're rarely available, so you have to book early. You've made arrangements with a realtor? I asked slowly. About my move? Yes, Dad. His voice was now patiently condescending, as if he were explaining something to an uncomprehending child. It's for your own good. Sun Terraces is a great place. They'll look after you, cook your meals, make sure you're healthy. And who will pay for this paradise on earth? I asked. Well, Kingsley hesitated. We thought you could use the money from selling some of your mineral collection. Delphine says there are some very valuable specimens in there. You can't take them all into a small apartment anyway. That's it. They've already planned my move and the sale of my stuff. And the house? I asked. Who's going to pay for its upkeep? Taxes, insurance, repairs? We'll manage, Kingsley answered quickly. Delphine can make an art studio in the house, take clients, and my business is about to boom. Interesting, I leaned back in my chair. And you decided all this without my participation? Dad, we talked about it during our last visit. You just didn't want to listen. But there's no choice now. Delphine and I are getting married. We need a place to live. And you need care. I don't need care, I said firmly. I'm 75, not 95. I'm of sound mind and good judgment, and I can decide where I want to live. No, Dad, Kingsley's voice was steely. This time I decide. I'm your son and your only relative, and I say it's time for you to go somewhere where you'll be taken care of. Something in his tone made me tense. It wasn't just the insolence of a spoiled son. It was something more sinister, as if he already thought I was incompetent, as if my wishes and rights no longer mattered. And if I refuse, I asked, then, Kingsley paused, then we'll have to take action. Delphine talked to a lawyer. If an elderly person can't adequately assess his or her condition and make reasonable decisions, the relatives can set up a guardianship. It took my breath away. My own son threatened to take away my legal capacity, to declare me incompetent to take my house. I'm taking your house, Father, Kingsley said stiffly, whether you want me to or not. You're too old to live alone and manage a property like this. It's time to hand over the reins to the young. At that moment, I felt a strange calmness. All my doubts were gone. The decision I'd made after their visit was the right one. You know, Kingsley, I said, smiling, though he couldn't see my smile. There's a problem with your plan. What kind of problem? He asked irritably. The house is gone, I answered simply. There was a pause on the line. What do you mean, no? Kingsley finally squeezed out. I mean, I sold it. A week ago. The papers are signed, the money's been received. In 3 days, I have to vacate the premises for the new owners. That's impossible. Kingsley sounded genuinely shocked. You couldn't sell the house. It's our family legacy. My family legacy, I corrected him. Sorry, which I have the right to dispose of as I see fit. But you can't, he began to choke with anger. You can't just sell the house. What about me? What about our plans? Your plans, I replied calmly. Not mine. You're lying, Kingsley shouted. You're just saying that to scare me. The house can't be sold so quickly. It can if the buyer is very interested and offers full price without haggling, I said. A young family, 2 small children. They fell in love with the house at first sight. They especially liked the backyard, perfect for a playground. No, no. Kingsley seemed to be losing control of himself. You couldn't. This was my house, my inheritance, which you planned to take from me while I was still alive, I pointed out. A strange understanding of inheritance. But what are you going to do? Where will you go? He still couldn't believe what was happening. I smiled. Oh, I'm going on a cruise. The one your mother and I always dreamed of, but could never afford because all the money went to your education and your projects. A cruise! He seemed unable to comprehend what he was hearing. What cruise? A 3-month cruise through the Scandinavian fjords with a stop in Iceland. A tour for active retirees. Hiking, volcano exploration, whale watching. Alice would have loved it. There was silence on the line. Then I heard Kingsley breathing heavily, clearly trying to hold back his anger. You can't do this to me, he said finally. I'm your son. Yes, you are, I agreed. And I've always loved you, despite your faults. But that doesn't give you the right to control my life or my property. I'll sue, Kingsley shouted. I'll prove that you're incompetent, that you don't know what you're doing. Try it, I said calmly. My doctor just yesterday confirmed that I'm in perfect condition for my age, both physically and mentally. The document is officially certified and attached to the purchase contract. I anticipated this reaction. You planned the whole thing. Kingsley's voice was one of disbelief mixed with rage. You did this on purpose to hurt me. No, son, I did it to protect myself. And frankly, to finally start living for myself instead of you. Like I've been doing for the last 37 years. I will never forgive you for this, Kingsley growled. Never. I know, I said quietly. And I'm sorry for the way things turned out. But it wasn't my choice. Where are you? Kingsley asked suddenly. I'll be right there. No, I said firmly. We have nothing more to talk about. Goodbye, son. I wish you happiness with Delphine. Don't you hang up on me, Kingsley screamed. Don't you dare! I hung up the phone, cutting off his stream of threats and accusations. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking slightly, but I felt surprisingly calm. I had done what I had to do, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. The phone rang again, but I didn't answer it. Instead, I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at my garden, flooded with sunlight. I would miss this house, every corner of it, but I didn't regret my decision. The house was just a building, and the real values, the memories, the experiences, the feelings, I would take with me. After talking to Kingsley, I made the final preparations before I left. With only 3 days to go before the house was handed over to its new owners, there was a lot of work to do. Boxes filled the living room, bedroom, and even part of the kitchen. Unpacking and unpacking decades of accumulated belongings was more difficult than I had anticipated. The morning began with sorting through the books in the study. I decided to give most of them to the public library, but I was going to take some of them with me, especially the rare editions on geology and mineralogy. They would go into storage with other valuable things that would not fit in the small apartment I had bought in a quiet part of town. An apartment Kingsley didn't know existed. At noon, Chase Holloway, my realtor, arrived. We'd met a few years ago at one of the Geological Society fundraisers. Chase, unlike most people in his profession, didn't look like a typical real estate agent. No flashy suits and subdued smiles. A calm, thoughtful, middle-aged man with a neatly trimmed graying beard and attentive eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. "How's the packing going, Ezra?" he asked, looking around the box-strewn living room. "Slower than I'd like," I admitted. "It's amazing how much stuff accumulates in a lifetime." Chase nodded understandingly. "Moving is always harder than it looks at first, especially when the house is full of memories. Yes, everything evokes some kind of emotion." I picked up an old photo album from the chair. Here, for example, found it behind the bookcase. I'd forgotten it even existed, and there were pictures from my wedding to Alice, early 70s, all dressed up in these ridiculous outfits. "Are you taking them with you?" Sure. You don't leave stuff like that behind." Chase sat down on the edge of the couch, pulling a file folder out of a leather briefcase. "I brought the last of the paperwork for you to sign. After that, all the formalities will be completed, and all you have to do is hand over the keys to the new owners on Saturday." I took the folder and began to look through the documents. Even though I trusted Chase, the habit of checking everything myself was too strong. "You know, Ezra," Chase said as I studied the paperwork, "I've been in this business for 20 years, but I've rarely seen a house as soulful as yours. It's a credit not to me, but to my parents," I replied, not lifting my eyes from the papers. "They put their hearts into it, and you have continued their work. It's good that the house is in good hands." I looked up. "Do you think they'll really keep it looking like this? They're not going to rebuild it?" Chase shook his head. "No, they truly appreciate the historic value of the house. Mr. Elliott is a professor of architecture, specializing in the Victorian period. For him, it's not just a dwelling, but an object of admiration and study." I nodded, relieved. When I'd made the decision to sell the house, I'd been concerned not only about the financial side of things, but also about the fate of the building. I didn't want the century-old mansion that had preserved the history of generations of my family to be turned into a faceless, modernist object, or worse, torn down to build some apartment complex. "Their kids are already figuring out which rooms they're going to choose," Chase continued with a smile. "The oldest daughter seems to have her eye on the attic bedroom with the east-facing window. Alice's room in her maidenhood," I remembered. "She always liked to wake up at first light." I signed the last page and handed the folder back to Chase. "That's it," he said, counting the pages. "The house is officially sold. Congratulations, Ezra. The deal's closed, and at a very good price, I must say. Thanks for your help, Chase, especially the speed. I didn't realize it could be done so quickly." "All the stars aligned in your case," he smiled. "A beautiful house in excellent condition, a motivated buyer with cash, and no need to sell the previous home. Even lawyers work faster than usual under these circumstances." We were silent for a while, looking at the living room, flooded by the afternoon sun. The walls, from which most of the paintings had already been removed, looked strangely bare. "Say, Ezra," Chase began cautiously, "I don't mean to pry, but does your son know about the sale?" "He does now," I sighed. "I told him yesterday." "And how did he react?" "Exactly as I expected," I grinned bitterly. "He didn't believe me at first. Then he was furious. Threatened to sue me, to declare me incompetent." Chase shook his head. "I'm sorry, family conflicts over real estate are the most painful. The saddest part is that he wasn't interested in the house per se, but in getting expensive real estate without effort." I stood up and walked to the window. "To him, it was just an asset on the balance sheet, not a house full of memories." "Well, that's not a problem anymore." Chase stood up and zipped up his briefcase. "The house is in good hands, and you're free to start a new chapter of your life. By the way, when are you going on the cruise?" "Monday. I'll move my stuff to the new apartment first, then straight to the airport." "Sounds like a great plan." Chase held out his hand. "I wish you a good trip, Ezra. You deserve it." "Thank you." I shook his hand firmly. "For everything." After Chase left, I went back to packing. The hardest thing to sort through was the mineral collection. Over 500 pieces, each with its own story, each one dear to my heart. I opened the glass cabinet in the study and carefully took out the first specimen, a piece of malachite the size of my fist, with an incredible pattern of concentric circles of dark green and turquoise colors. A gift from my mentor, Professor Henderson, at the end of graduate school. "Stones will outlive us all, Ezra," he said then. "That's their beauty and solace." I wrapped each specimen in soft cloth, then bubble wrap, and carefully placed them in specially ordered wooden boxes with individual cells. This work took time and patience, but I couldn't trust it to anyone else. The collection was too valuable, not so much in monetary terms, although some specimens were worth a lot, but in personal, emotional terms. Here's a tourmaline from our first expedition with Alice to Brazil, an amethyst gemstone we found in Uruguay on our honeymoon, a Marion from the Urals, brought back from a joint expedition with Soviet geologists in the 70s. Each stone is a part of my life, my history. I was so absorbed in my work that I didn't immediately hear the doorbell ring. There was a messenger with an envelope on the doorstep. "Mr. Briggs?" he asked. "You have a letter from Mr. and Mrs. Elliot." I thanked the messenger and went back to the office and opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter on expensive paper with an embossed logo. "Dear Mr. Briggs, we wanted to reiterate our sincere thanks for entrusting us with your home. We understand how hard it is to part with a place filled with family memories and promise to treat it with the respect it deserves. We look forward with excitement to the opportunity to be custodians of this architectural treasure. As I mentioned during our meeting, Victorian architecture is my professional passion, and the opportunity to not only study, but to live in such a beautiful example of the era is a real treat. We intend to preserve all the original elements of the house: moldings, parquet, fireplaces, stained glass windows. The only changes planned are the modernization of the engineering systems, and they will be done with the utmost care, without compromising the historic appearance of the building. Catherine and I would be very pleased if you could find time to visit us in the future. The door will always be open to you. Respectfully and gratefully, James and Catherine Elliott. Attached to the letter was a photograph, a happy young couple with 2 children, a girl of about 10 and a boy of about 5, all smiling for the camera against the backdrop of a blooming garden. I felt tears come to my eyes. This house deserved just such tenants, people who would appreciate its history, fill it with laughter and love, not like Kingsley and his Delphine, who saw it as an asset to be exploited or resold. I gently placed the letter on the table and returned to my collection. There were over 300 more specimens to pack, and time was short. But now I worked with a light heart, knowing that I had made the right decision. In the evening, when most of the collection was already packed, I allowed myself a brief pause. I sat in my favorite chair with a glass of whiskey and let the memories flow freely. I remembered the first time I saw the house. I was only 5 years old when my parents bought it from an elderly widow, Mrs. Henderson. I remembered my childhood room on the 3rd floor, overlooking the big maple tree in the yard, learning to ride his bike in the driveway, how bringing Alice here after our first date in college, nervous that she might find the house too old-fashioned, how preparing for Kingsley's birth, setting up the baby's room, picking out dinosaur wallpaper. So many memories. But memories aren't tied to walls and roofs. They live in the heart, and I'll take them with me wherever I go. Later that night, as I was finishing packing the last of the minerals, the phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID Kingsley. I decided not to answer it. Whatever he had to say could wait, or more likely never be said. I knew my son too well. An angry outburst was usually followed by clumsy attempts at manipulation, accusations, then complaints about his hard life, then hints about how parental help would make things better. No, that was over. It was time to start living my own life, without the constant guilt and obligations to a man who saw me only as a source of material goods. The phone stopped ringing, but almost immediately it rang again. This time I didn't even look at the screen. Instead, I walked over to the machine and simply unplugged it. The silence that followed seemed like a blessing. I went back to my rocks. I packed the most valuable specimens last, not by value but by personal significance. A piece of obsidian from Yellowstone, where Alice and I had honeymooned. The rudal quartz I found on Kingsley's birthday. The amethyst druzy that Alice gave me for our last wedding anniversary, a month before she was diagnosed with cancer. After wrapping up the last sample, I closed the lid of the box and secured it with brass latches. Done. This part of my life was securely packed away, ready to be moved to a new location. And so was I. I looked around the nearly empty office. The bookshelves were gaping empty. There was only a lamp and a few documents on the desk, which were to be sorted out tomorrow. On the wall were light rectangles in place of the paintings that had been removed. It was a strange feeling to see a place that had been your home for so long gradually lose its individuality, return to its original state of an empty shell, ready to receive new tenants. But there was a beauty to it, a rightness to it. The circle was closing. I left the office, quietly shutting the door behind me. There were 2 more days of preparations for departure, but the most important thing was done. The house had found new owners worthy of its history. My collection was ready for transportation, and I was ready for a new chapter of my life. A chapter in which there would be no room for the toxic relationship with Kingsley, for the constant manipulation and financial demands, for feeling used and unappreciated. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free, and that freedom was worth parting with the home I loved so much. The next morning I woke up to the sound of rain drumming on the roof. Perfect weather for reflection and quiet work. I planned to spend the day sorting through personal papers, letters, documents, photos. I needed to decide what to take with me on the cruise, what to send to storage, and what to just throw away. After breakfast, I sat at the dining room table with old albums and boxes of documents spread out in front of me. The work progressed slowly. Each photo, each letter evoked memories, making me distracted and immersed in the past. Here was a university diploma. Here was Kingsley's birth certificate. Here were old postcards from my parents, written during their trip to Europe. I didn't notice how the hours flew by. The rain had intensified into a torrential downpour, and I was still at the beginning of my journey. The sharp ringing of the doorbell snapped me out of my reverie. I wasn't expecting visitors, and I didn't want to be distracted. It might be a delivery man or a neighbor. Deciding to ignore the bell, I continued my work. But the call came again, insistently, at length. And then there was a knock at the door. "Daddy, I know you're home. Open up." Kingsley's voice, harsh and demanding. I sighed. Surely he couldn't just accept the situation and leave me alone. The bell rang again, now continuously, as if someone had pressed the button and wouldn't let go. I got up slowly and headed for the front door. No need to make a scene in front of the neighbors. When I opened the door, I saw Kingsley and Delphine, drenched in rain. From the look of them, they'd arrived in a hurry. Kingsley had no umbrella, his jacket unzipped, his hair sticking to his forehead. Delphine stood a little farther back, bundled up in a thin raincoat, a look of annoyance on her face. "Come in," I said, backing away from the door. There was no reason to stand in the rain. They literally burst into the hallway. Kingsley immediately looked around, as if expecting to see proof that I'd lied about selling the house. "So it's true?" he blurted out, pointing at the boxes that filled the hallway. "You really sold the house?" "Like I said on the phone, yes," I replied calmly. "The papers are signed. The money has been received. I'm handing over the keys to the new owners on Saturday." "You can't do that," Kingsley was almost shouting. It's illegal." "Selling your own house is legal," I pointed out, "especially when it's in my name alone." "You knew we were planning to live here," Kingsley continued to rage. "You did it out of spite, to hurt us." I shook my head. "I did it because it was the right decision for me. The house is too big for one person, as you never tired of reminding me, and I really need money for traveling." Delphine finally died down and stepped forward. "Ezra," she said, trying to speak softly, "we understand that you're upset about what we said about moving, but selling the house is too drastic a decision. Maybe it's not too late to call it off." "I'm afraid it's too late," I replied. "The deal is finalized, all the documents are signed and certified. The house is legally owned by the Elliott family." "Who are the Elliots?" Kingsley hissed. "I've never heard of them." "James Elliott is a professor of architecture at the university. His wife, Catherine, is a pediatrician. They have 2 children. Very nice family." "And how much did they pay?" Kingsley asked demandingly. "That's none of your business," I replied calmly. "It is my business." He stepped toward me, fists clenched. "You sold my inheritance." "The house wasn't your inheritance," I said firmly. "It was my property to dispose of as I saw fit." "I am your son," Kingsley was almost shouting. "Your only child. Everything you have should have gone to me. Should have? I raised an eyebrow. That's an interesting way of putting it. You think you're entitled to my property while I'm still alive? You're just getting back at me. He slammed his fist against the wall, making the painting hanging next to it shake. You've always been a cruel and cold father. I looked at my son and didn't recognize him. What had happened to the laughing boy Alice and I had raised with such love? When did he turn into this greedy, evil man? Kingsley, I tried to speak calmly. I sold the house because I wanted to start a new life. No commitments, no strings attached. Perhaps if you had shown more interest in my life, not just my possessions, we could have found another solution. Don't you dare accuse me, he shouted, taking a step in my direction. Delphine quickly put a hand on his shoulder, holding him back. Kingsley, calm down, she said. We're not going to get anywhere this way. She turned to me, pulling a friendly expression on her face that poorly concealed the calculating glint in her eyes. Ezra, we understand your desire to travel, she began in a conciliatory tone. It's natural at your age, but selling the house is such a drastic decision. Maybe we could find a compromise. For example, you could give the house to Kingsley, and he could provide you with money to travel. I could barely keep from laughing. And where did Kingsley get the money from? From the many successful businesses he'd launched and ruined over the past 15 years? Or maybe you're suggesting I take out a mortgage on my own house. Kingsley twitched as if slapped. You don't understand anything about modern business, he blurted out. My online consulting business is about to take off. Just like the last 5 projects, I nodded. Do you know how much money I've invested in your promising ideas over the years? More than 200,000, and not a single dollar returned. It was an investment in the future, Kingsley objected. That's how business works. No, that's how fraud works, I replied calmly. But enough about that. The house is sold, the deal is closed. On Saturday, I hand over the keys to the new owners, and on Monday, I fly out. End of story. Delphine glanced around the hallway, noticing the boxes of my belongings. Where are you moving to? She asked with feigned concern. Do you already have a new place to live? I wasn't going to share that information with them. Knowing Kingsley, he might try to break in or cause trouble. I've arranged everything, I answered evasively. He's not telling me because he's afraid we'll find his new lair and get in the way again. Kingsley grinned bitterly. Sonum, well, keep your secrets, Daddy. But know this, I'm going to sue. I'll prove that you were incapacitated when you signed the documents. You can try, I said calmly. My lawyer and my doctor have prepared all the necessary documents proving my mental and physical health. They are attached to the contract of sale just in case of such insinuations. What? Kingsley went pale. Did you plan this? Of course, I shrugged. I knew you wouldn't take it lightly. You've never been able to lose with dignity, not even as a kid. Kingsley gasped with rage, but before he could respond, Delphine stepped in again. What about your mineral collection? She asked. You can't take it all to wherever you're moving to. That was it. They hadn't given up hope of getting at least some of my possessions. The collection is already packed, I said, pointing to the wooden crates against the wall. They'll move it to a safe house tomorrow. A safe place? Delphine asked. What does that mean? It means a place you won't know anything about, I answered firmly. Kingsley suddenly rushed over to one of the crates and tried to open it. The lid was fastened, and he failed. Kingsley! Delphine exclaimed, clearly shocked by this behavior. He's hiding the most valuable thing! Kingsley shouted, trying to open another drawer. He's going to sell everything, and we'll get nothing. I stepped forward, grabbing his arm. Enough, I said quietly but firmly. This is my property, and I'm asking you not to touch it. Kingsley yanked his arm out and shoved me away. I lost my balance and fell, hitting my thigh on the edge of the box. Kingsley! Delphine rushed over to me, helping me up. What are you doing? He stole everything from me. Kingsley was really hysterical. Everything that was supposed to be mine. I stood up, feeling the pain in my hip, but trying not to show weakness. You'd better leave, I said calmly. Both of you, immediately. Or what? Kingsley asked defiantly. Call the police? On your own son? If I have to, yes, I answered, looking him straight in the eye. I won't tolerate violence in my house, not even from you. Delphine stepped in again. clearly trying to defuse the situation. Come on, Kingsley. She tugged at his sleeve. We need to cool down and think. We can't decide anything now anyway. No, he tried to pull away. I'm not leaving until I know where the money from the sale of the house went. That money is mine, I said firmly, and I don't have to account for my finances to you. I am your son, Kingsley shouted again. Your heir. An heir inherits when the testator dies, I said dryly. As you can see, I'm still alive and well, and I intend to stay that way for a long time to come, despite your obvious hopes to the contrary. Kingsley flared with rage, but Delphine held his arm tightly, stopping him from lunging at me. Let's go, she repeated more insistently. It's no use. I watched her glance around the hallway, mentally counting the boxes, assessing their contents. Her calculating mind was already shifting to a new strategy, realizing the house was lost. Your mineral collection, she said suddenly, looking me in the eye. It's worth a lot, isn't it? Kingsley said there are some rare specimens in there. They're priceless to me, I answered. Their material value is secondary. But if you decided to sell some of the specimens, she paused. I could help. I have contacts among collectors. So that's where the wind is blowing. Collecting as a backup. I appreciate the offer, but I don't plan to sell anything, I said firmly. Don't listen to her, Kingsley snapped at me. She's just trying to gain my trust so she can get your stones, just like she got me for money in a house. A look of genuine shock appeared on Delphine's face. What are you saying, Kingsley? She exclaimed. I love you. You do? He laughed bitterly. And I thought you loved my prospects, my potential, my status as sole heir. I watched the scene in silence, realizing that the relationship between them was cracking under the pressure of disappointment and unfulfilled hopes of easy wealth. You said yourself that the house would be ours? Delphine exclaimed, backing away from Kingsley. You promised that we would live here after the wedding, that your father would move in and we'd make this place our home. I thought I could convince him, Kingsley shouted. I didn't know he was such a traitor. A traitor, I asked quietly, for disposing of his property, for deciding to live for himself after 75 years of working and caring for others? You should have taken care of my future, Kingsley repeated stubbornly. I took care of your future for 37 years, I replied. I paid for your education, your housing, your many business ventures. I was there for you when you divorced your first wife. I gave you money when you were broke. But there's a limit to everything. It's time you learn to stand on your own 2 feet. Delphine looked at Kingsley with an expression that was a mixture of shock, disappointment, and growing doubt. You said your business was almost profitable, she said slowly. You said you only needed a little time. It is, Kingsley exclaimed. A few more months and the money will flow. Like last time, she asked quietly. And the time before that? I could see reality slowly creeping into her mind. Kingsley had seduced her not with his personality, but with the prospect of a rich inheritance. Now that those prospects were gone, she saw him for what he was, a grown man, unable to take care of himself, living on illusions and dreams of easy wealth. I think you both should leave, I said firmly. I have to finish packing. The movers are coming tomorrow to pick up the collection, and on Saturday I'm handing over the keys to the new owners. This isn't over, Kingsley said threateningly. I'll sue. I'll prove you were incapacitated. Do what you want, I said calmly. But I want you to know that your threats only confirm the correctness of my decision. I don't want to deal with a man who threatens his own father with a lawsuit over property. Delphine pulled Kingsley toward the door. Come on, we need to talk, she said in a strained voice. Alone. Kingsley let her lead her away, but turned around on the threshold. You're going to regret this, father, he said grimly. When you're alone, with no home, no money, no family, you'll regret it. I already have, I said quietly. I wish I'd done it sooner. Goodbye, Kingsley. I closed the door behind them and leaned against the wall, my legs shaking from the stress I'd been under. My hips still hurt from the fall, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the mental pain. I realized that I had just lost my son for good, or rather, the man who had once been my son. Because the Kingsley I had known and loved was long gone, giving way to this greedy, selfish stranger. Through the window, I could see them arguing in the driveway. Delphine was gesticulating vigorously, clearly asking unpleasant questions. Kingsley waved her off, his posture defensive. Finally, they got into the car, but even through the closed door, I could hear them continuing to argue. As the car moved off, I realized that I would probably never see either of them again. And the strange thing was, the thought didn't cause regret, only relief. I went back to the table, where the photos and documents were still spread out. I picked up an old picture Kingsley at 5, laughing, ice cream on his chin. Next to it, Alice and I, young, happy. We did the best we could, didn't we? I asked the photograph of my late wife. We loved him, raised him, taught him goodness. Where did we go wrong? There was no answer, of course. Perhaps we did go wrong somewhere. Or perhaps some people just choose their own path, despite the upbringing and values they tried to instill in them. Either way, the time for regrets was over. A new life was ahead, without a home that had become too much of a burden, without a son who had become a stranger, but with the hope of peace and fulfillment. The sea air filled my lungs as I stepped onto the deck of the cruise ship Norway. The early morning sea was calm, almost mirror-like, reflecting the pale pink sky. I wrapped my wool cardigan tighter. Even in the northern latitudes, it was cool even in summer, and especially at dawn. It had been 10 days since I'd left Minneapolis. 10 days of a new life, without a house that had become too heavy a burden of memories, without Kingsley's toxic presence, without the constant tension and anticipation of another demand for money or help. I leaned against the handrail, watching the vague outlines of the coast appear on the horizon in the distance. Iceland, the land of ice and fire, the place Alice and I had dreamed of our entire lives together, but had never been able to visit. Alice, if only you could see it, I whispered, turning to the ghost of my wife, who seemed to always be with me. Exactly as we'd imagined, wild, stark beauty. Talking to spirits, a friendly voice with a slight accent sounded nearby. I turned around and saw Ingrid Thorson, my new acquaintance, whom I had befriended during the first days of the cruise. A 70-year-old widow from Norway, she had worked as a marine biologist and traveled halfway around the world studying whales. Now retired, she was traveling for pleasure, enjoying the freedom she had so long put off for her career and family. With my wife, I answered honestly. We had always dreamed of seeing Iceland together. Ingrid nodded understandingly and stood beside me, leaning against the handrail. Her gray hair, gathered in a simple bun, was silvery in the morning light. She is with you, she said simply. In your memories, in your heart, in the way you look at the world through her eyes, noticing the details that would please her. I smiled. Ingrid understood such things. Like many on this ship, she had lived a long, full life, full of joys and losses. Most of the passengers on the Norwegian were over 60, retirees, widows and widowers, couples who had been together for 40 or 50 years. People who had experience and wisdom behind them, ready to share stories and listen to others without judgment. Are you going on the tour today? Ingrid asked, nodding toward the approaching shore. Of course, I answered. I wouldn't miss the volcanic caves for the world. Then I'll see you at breakfast, she smiled and headed toward the aft part of the ship, where a group of morning yoga enthusiasts usually gathered. I continued to watch the approaching shore. Black basalt cliffs, green mossy plains, the white cap of a glacier in the distance. A stark, primeval beauty. A place where the elements rule indiscriminately. At breakfast in the ship's main restaurant, I joined my usual company. Ingrid, the Bergman couple from Sweden, astronomy professor Hugo Fischer from Great Britain, and former opera singer Isabella Moreno from Spain. All of them, like me, were traveling alone but quickly found common ground and now try to stick together during excursions and activities on the ship. Today is going to be an exciting day, Hugo said as he buttered his toast. Lava caves, hot springs, and maybe the northern lights in the evening, if we're lucky with the weather. This time of year, I wondered. Anything is possible in Iceland, Ingrid smiled. I've been here in July and seen snowfall, and once in January it was so hot that the locals were swimming in the ocean. A land of contrasts, Isabella nodded. It's like life itself, isn't it? I pondered her words. Indeed, my life in recent weeks had been the epitome of contrast, from the routine of my old home to the uncertainty and freedom of travel, from the weight of obligation to my son, to the lightness of new acquaintances and experiences. After breakfast, I returned to the cabin to prepare for the excursion. The cozy space with the large panoramic window was my home for the next 3 months. I didn't spare any money for a cabin with a sea view. Waking up to the sound of the waves every morning and seeing the endless water was worth every penny spent. My phone beeped, announcing an email I had received. I rarely checked email while traveling, but the satellite internet on the ship was working steadily, so I decided to take a look. The email was from Chase, my realtor. Dear Ezra, I hope your trip is going great. I wanted to let you know that the Elliots moved in safely last weekend and are extremely happy with their purchase. They are planning a small housewarming party and asked me to tell you that they would love to see you when you return to town. I also think you will be interested to know that the condo you purchased is completely ready to move in. I've checked all the systems as you requested and made sure everything is working properly. Your belongings from the storage unit will be delivered upon your return as we agreed. One more piece of news that may interest you. According to reliable sources, your son and Miss Carew's wedding has been canceled. It seems that after the wedding was canceled, she returned to Chicago, where it appears she already has a husband. Didn't mean to spread gossip, but felt you should know. Enjoy the cruise and don't worry about a thing. Everything's under control. Best wishes, Chase. I reread the letter twice, especially the last paragraph. Delphine was already married. No wonder she was so eager to get her hands on the house and the mineral collection. She was probably a professional money hunter, moving from one potential victim to another. Poor Kingsley. Despite all his greed and selfishness, he didn't deserve to be cheated like this. For a moment, I felt the urge to call him, to see how he was doing, but I suppressed the urge. Our relationship had been torn too far apart, too many bitter words said on both sides. Kingsley needs to learn how to handle his problems on his own, without my interference or financial support. Maybe this experience will finally make him grow up. I wrote a short reply to Chase, thanking him for the information and asking him to send my best wishes to the Elliots. I didn't mention the Kingsley news. Some topics are best left in the past. As I prepared to go ashore, I reflected on the contrast Isabella had mentioned. Iceland, with its volcanoes and glaciers, really reminded me of my present life. The bitterness of separation from my son and the sweetness of newfound freedom, longing for my old home and admiration for new horizons, loneliness and new friendships. The excursion was even more impressive than I expected. We descended into a lava cave formed thousands of years ago after a volcanic eruption. Inside, it was cool and damp. The walls cast all shades of black and burgundy. Our guide, a young Icelander with long hair gathered in a ponytail, talked about the geologic processes that formed these underground corridors. Lava flowed here at speeds of up to 30 kilometers per hour, he said, pointing to the frozen waves on the walls. Outside it cooled faster, forming a hard crust, but inside it kept flowing, creating these tunnels. I listened with professional interest, occasionally asking questions, which the guide answered with obvious pleasure, having discovered someone in the group who understood geologic terminology. You are well versed in volcanology, he remarked after a particularly detailed question I asked about the composition of the local basalts. I'm a geologist, I replied with a smile. I'm retired, but I still have a professional interest. So you have chosen the perfect place for your trip, the guide smiled broadly. Iceland is a paradise for geologists. I nodded, feeling a sudden rush of emotion. Alice would say the same thing. She had always dreamed of seeing the geysers and volcanoes of Iceland, endlessly studying guidebooks and scientific articles about this amazing island. Cancer took her too soon, preventing her from realizing that dream. Are you all right? Ingrid asked quietly, noticing my condition. Yes, I answered, wiping the unwanted moisture from my eyes. I just remembered my wife. She was a botanist, but she shared my love of geology. We planned to come here together when we retired. Ingrid silently squeezed my hand, expressing understanding without words. After the caves, we were taken to a geothermal area where jets of steam spurted out of the ground and small pools of mud gurgled in incredible colors, from gray-blue to bright orange. The smell of sulfur filled the air, making it seem unreal, as if we were on another planet. Look over there, Hugo pointed to a small geyser, which at that very moment spewed a column of hot water several meters high. What power! And precise, Isabella added. They erupt with the regularity of clockwork. I watched the geyser, thinking about how similar these natural phenomena are to human emotions. Outwardly calm, even serene, but inwardly bubbling, boiling, ready at any moment to burst out in an uncontrollable torrent. Wasn't that what happened to Kingsley when he found out the house was for sale? Isn't that what happens to me when I remember the last conversation I had with my son? The day flew by. After the geothermal area, we visited a waterfall plunging over 30 meters into a deep canyon surrounded by emerald green moss. Then there was a farm where Icelandic horses are raised, small but strong animals with thick manes, adapted to the harsh local climate. Toward evening, tired but satisfied, we returned to the ship. After dinner, our small company gathered in the observation salon on the upper deck. Huge floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows allowed us to watch the sea and sky from the cold wind. "What do you think of Iceland, Ezra?" Henrik Bergman asked, filling glasses with wine. "Did it live up to expectations?" "Exceeded," I answered sincerely. "I've read a lot about this place, seen pictures, but nothing compares to the real experience." "That's what traveling is all about," his wife Astrid nodded. "No book, no movie can convey the smells, sounds, sensations. You have to live it yourself. Like all of life," Isabella added quietly. "You can't live it according to someone else's script." Her words made me think. Wasn't that what I'd been trying to do for the past 15 years? Live by a script written by a sense of obligation to Kingsley, by social expectations, by habit? Selling the house and this cruise were the first steps to living from my own script, to realizing that even at 75, it's not too late to start over. "Look!" Hugo suddenly exclaimed, pointing out the window. "The northern lights!" We all turned and saw greenish flashes of light begin to shimmer over the dark sea, as if an invisible artist had painted on the canvas of the night sky. The glow intensified, adding new shades of pink, violet, blue. "Incredible," I whispered, mesmerized by the sight. "The locals call it the dance of the spirits," Ingrid said. "The northern lights are believed to be the souls of the dead communicating with the living." I stared at the shimmering lights and thought about Alice. Was she out there right now, among those ephemeral flashes? Did she see me finally realize our shared dream? "I'm so glad I lived to see this moment," I said quietly. "Sekonan." "We're all glad." Ingrid put her hand on my shoulder. "And there's so much more to come, Ezra. This is just the beginning." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. Sadness at the thought of Alice not being there to share this moment. Longing for the son I would probably never see again. But also a deep, quiet happiness at the realization of my own freedom and the openness of the future. Later, back in the cabin, I sat down at a small desk and opened my laptop. I had started keeping a travel journal back on my first day on the ship, just to organize my thoughts. But now the habit had become an important part of my day. Day 10, Iceland. Today I finally saw the land of fire and ice that Alice and I had dreamed of for so long. The lava caves, the geysers, the waterfalls, everything was exactly as majestic and stark as we had imagined. I wish she could have seen it with her own eyes, but I felt her presence close by all day. Got an email from Chase. The house has been handed over to the new owners. They are happy and even want to throw a housewarming party with me in attendance when I get back. It's nice to know that the old house is in good hands, that it's appreciated not only as real estate, but as a piece of history. Kingsley and Delphine broke up. Turns out she was already married. Typical money hunter. Too bad for Kingsley, though his greed and selfishness ultimately led to this situation. Hopefully this will be a lesson to him. Make him grow up. Though who knows? At his age, people rarely change drastically. Sometimes I find myself missing him. Not the greedy, bitter man he'd become, but the little boy Alice and I loved so much. The teenager who, despite all the difficulties of transition, could still make us laugh with his jokes and delight us with unexpected acts of kindness. Where and when did we lose that boy? I may never know. Saw the northern lights today. Such ephemeral yet powerful beauty. Nature reminds us how small we are, But there is something comforting about it. Our problems, our losses are all just tiny blips in the endless stream of existence. My new company on the ship are interesting, wise people. They remind me that life doesn't end with retirement or the loss of loved ones. It just changes, like the landscape outside the train window. Tomorrow we're visiting a glacier. Alice has always wanted to see a real glacier. I'll take her picture with me. Let her see that beauty too, even if it's through my eyes. I closed the laptop and walked to the window. The night sea was calm, with only a slight ripple of moonlight disturbing its smooth surface. The northern lights were almost gone, with only faint flashes of greenish light flickering on the horizon. I thought about the contrast Isabella had spoken of bitterness and sweetness, about loss and gain, of the past and the future. I lost a son but found freedom, lost a home but gained a whole world to explore. I lost my life, but I gained new opportunities and new friends. Maybe that was the point, not to cling to the past, but to embrace change, no matter how painful. Not to let fear and a sense of duty dictate how to live out the remaining years, and never assume it's too late for anything.